Another firm that got a government green energy loan is in serious trouble. Battery manufacturer Ener1 now delisted from the NASDAQ, even though it received a grant for $118 million in taxpayer money. Vice President Joe Biden visited the Ener1 battery plant back in January. It's more ammunition for my next guest. He is Republican Congressman Cliff Stearns. He's the chairman of the subcommittee investigating green loans like this one. And, of course, there is Solyndra. Congressman, Chairman, good to see you. Thank you for coming in. What do you know about Ener1?
I don't know too much about that one, David. Obviously, we're disappointed. You know, over the weekend also, Beacon Power, upstate New York, Stephentown, New York, also went bankrupt. So you can see there's a trend here. So I think it's very, very enlightening to see that the president, Herb Allison, was appointed by him to look at all these energy loans at the Department of Energy, and I welcome that. But unfortunately, David, I think this should have been done before the horse was out of the barn.
Well, and the question is what they're going to do now. Specifically, this group got a grant for $118 million. They've already drawn down $55 million, and they may get more. Today, we heard from the Energy Department that any additional funds received from the government would need to be matched dollar for dollar with their own investment. Talking about Ener1, I would say just, cut the money right now, whether or not they get private investment or not. What would you say?
I agree with you, because a lot of these loans are in areas that we're at an unfair advantage with China, because they're flooding the market with cheap, frankly, solar manufacturing panels and wind turbines, and also they have access to this very low labor rate as well as raw materials, and we have so much regulation over here. So I think the president should look carefully at all these green energy, Department of Energy loan guarantees, which, as you understand, David, they're not a loan guarantee. There's no private investor other than the government cutting a check out of Treasury, giving the DOE, and DOE gives it to these companies. So taxpayers actually will lose this money directly. And I just think with the deficit what it is, it's not a good sign to continue to fund these type of loan guarantees.
Well, and to your point about expertise of this particular company, and again, I want an American company to succeed, but there are a lot of analysts, and there's one in particular, a guy named Shu Sun, who's an analyst specifically on battery power. He says the electric battery market at the moment is a highly competitive one. Smaller players like Ener1 will struggle in such a competitive market. Again, the government's betting on the wrong player.
Well, I think the government's saying that we've got to stay competitive in alternative energy policy, and I understand that. But at the same time, I think if you give it to the R&D section of this country through university, through institutions like Sandia Labs in New Mexico, and let them define the competitive advantage we have, and then commit, let private investment commit and not the taxpayers, I think we're better off, instead of committing money into the manufacturing cycle and picking winners and losers. Let the free market do that in this country.
All right, well, let's get down to talking about the granddaddy here, Solyndra, or at least so far the granddaddy, half a billion dollars down the tubes. Thursday is when you expect the government to respond, the White House to respond to your subpoena for information about Solyndra. Did you get any word yet from the White House as to whether they're going to respond?
Well, no, but we assume that what's going to happen is we'll issue the subpoena this Thursday. It'll be an up or down vote with the Democrats and Republicans voting for it, and I hope most of the Democrats will support us, because all we're saying is the inner circle of the White House, the West Wing, we'd just like to see the emails, the communications of these folks having on Solyndra. We have Valerie Jarrett, who is a senior advisor to the president, was on one of the emails we already have, so we know that the inner circle is already communicating back and forth on Solyndra with the Department of Energy. So all we're asking is for these. Now, the president obviously can take executive privilege here, but frankly, I don't think this is national security.
Well, what happens, though, if on Thursday you get some Democrats on board, you issue the subpoena, and the White House doesn't respond, or they try to stonewall in some other way? What do you do then?
Well, the procedure is then the president has to delineate which ones are executive privilege. He doesn't have to show them to us, but he has to delineate every one of those and show which ones that he wants to protect, or shall we say executive privilege. So we get a chance to see what he's talking about, but at the same time, we're going to point out there's many, many others that are not in this delineated file that you gave us, Mr. President, that we want to see. So he has to really defend his executive privilege. He just can't have a blanket executive privilege. He's got to actually defend it and show which ones he's talking about.
Well, at the risk of second-guessing the president before it's happened, isn't it fair to say that there is no executive privilege, there's no national security issues involved here?
No, I mean, we're just talking about what happened on Solyndra. It's nothing to do with national security. We're asking where the taxpayers' money went. And frankly, we're just trying to understand, did the White House actually push this out knowing that it was going to fail? And if they pushed it out knowing that it was going to fail, what was the reason why they did this? And so I think the American taxpayer deserve an answer. So why on the flip would he want to protect that information? Because it's really, shall we say, transparent information that taxpayers deserve to know.
Have you tried to reach out to the White House to avoid any kind of constitutional flap and say, look, how do you plan to respond to this if it's issued?
Well, we have. David, we've sent letters and we've called over there. We got pretty much a stonewall on this case. They feel that the inner circle of the West Wing is off bounds and we have no right to ask us information. We disagree. Under the Constitution, as the chairman of the oversight, I have the responsibility, in fact, to have oversight of the executive branch. And so I'm just asking for this little loan. In their opinion, it's little because the president said it's just one of those loans. It's an anomaly, but I don't think so. I think $500 million is a sizable amount of money, and I just want to get to the bottom of how this actually happened.
Well, and they are adding up. I mean, you got Solyndra, you got Beacon, now you got Enter1, and the question is whether we have there's a pattern of betting on losers here. The 17th is when Stephen Chu is expected to come in, the Secretary of the Department of Energy. What is the key point you want to make with him, the key question?
Well, we'll put him under oath, the Secretary of Energy, Chu, and we'll ask him, why did he subordinate taxpayers' loan to 2 outside hedge funds? And when you think about it, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 says that's a legal act to do. So we'd like to understand from the Secretary what was his justification for taking taxpayers' loan and subordinating that amount of money to these 2 hedge funds. And also we want to understand his counsel. What was the counsel that he used? Why didn't he use the counsel that was already there when he got there?
Well, let me just ask you, forgive me for interrupting, Chairman, but let me just ask you the first question, put it to you. You've had a lot of time to chew this over. What do you think? You must have thought about pros and cons of why they would have subordinated the taxpayer. Why do you think the taxpayer was subordinated?
Well, I think they were so anxious to make Solyndra their first poster child green energy loan guarantee to work, they would do anything and everything to make it work. So some of the investors that were in Solyndra said to the administration, let us bring in 2 of our hedge funds and we'll prop this up and try and get it through to be successful. So the president said probably to the Secretary Chu, or Secretary Chu said to the council, we've got to make this work. But in the end, it didn't work, and frankly, the chief financial officer of the Treasury Department said under oath that in 28 years he has never seen subordination of taxpayers' money to outside commercial loans. So I think Secretary Chu has a lot to explain.
Well, and particularly you say 28 years. This law, the law that allowed these loans that was made in 2005, specifically noted saying never, ever, ever subordinate the taxpayer to private sector loans here. I mean, they saw this coming, the guys who wrote this thing.
Right, and you know, we've had a counsel for the Department of Energy has written 2 memos to try and justify this. We don't think they, shall we say, make the case, and so we'd like Secretary Chu to explain his case. You know, obviously he has a fair opportunity to do so on the 17th, and I'm very, very pleased he's coming to testify.
Well, and again, let's hope everything turns out well, but if it doesn't, or perhaps now in conjunction with that, is it time to appoint an independent counsel?
I don't know yet, David. I think we're still pursuing all the leads. I think if it turns out that the communications that the White House is not allowing us to see, which would indicate that there was some strong influence coming from the White House, I think that would be very alarming and disturbing to think that the White House was using political ties, people that are involved with fundraiser, wealthy donors, to push something. That would be a concern, and that's disturbing. But I don't think we're at that point at this point. I think we just have to continue our investigation and to get Secretary Chu under oath.
All right. Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner wants an audit of all of the loans, all of these loan guarantees on green projects. And I hold in my hand just a partial list of some of the loans, but we're talking about $35 billion worth of loans, not all of which have been drawn down, but that's how many have been promised. Would you be in favor of that? And specifically, I want to focus on one bugaboo for me, which is the foreign companies that have received these loans, like Abengoa, the Spanish company that couldn't get any more money out of the Spanish government, so they came here. Or there's even a Russian company mentioned as one of the recipients of a loan guarantee.
I would support that, and frankly, I think that's what the president is trying to short-circuit by his appointing Herb Allison to head a commission to look at all the DOE loans and 60 days report back to the president. So I think they're anticipating Mr. Sensenbrenner's letter, but I think a GAO audit would be appropriate. We are doing all 28 loans, and now it's 35. We are going through these ourselves, but it wouldn't hurt to have another part of the United States government looking at this, because in the end, this is taxpayers' money, and we're talking about $35 billion.
But to make sure I get you correctly, you're saying that Herb Allison look at all this is not enough, even though this guy's worked for both Democrats and Republicans?
Well, obviously, he works in the executive branch. He got appointed by the president. He's a very upstanding man and has a good record, but I don't think it would hurt for the GAO to do an audit, too. And,
yeah.
I think with this kind of money, the quicker and sooner we stop this nonsense and protect taxpayers, the better.
And what about foreign companies getting so much of our money? That riles me. Does it rile you?
Oh, it does. And it also riles me that a lot of companies, for example, Sun Power and Fisker Automotive, actually have farmed out the manufacturing of their products overseas. For example, Solar Power farmed out their manufacturing to Mexico, and then Fisker Automotive is used theirs in Finland to manufacture their products. So, I mean, that's not good. We're not creating jobs in this country by doing that.
Well, no, although Fisker would argue that some of their jobs are being created here, but the question is whether you can isolate it. I'm sure some of the money went over there as well. Chairman Cliff Stearns, good to see you, sir. Thank you for taking so much time with us. We appreciate it.